Good day, everybody. It's Howard Redwood here. What we're doing today is talking about the use of the toolkit that we we've put together. It's taken us a while to do it. Timed quite nicely, actually, in view that we're going back to work. But we need to explain. We feel we need to explain the return to work toolkit because the situation we're in is that the only armament, the only weapons we've got against coronavirus is really the communication and mitigation. So it's communication, talking to the students to tell them what we intend to do, how we're going to do it, how things will change. And also it's the mitigation of ensuring that we take seriously the risks that can come to us from households of the students we're teaching and where they're coming from, and vice versa, and also having the vehicle mitigated with sanitation, etc. So we are trying to explain that really on the toolkit, and that's why we are having this webinar today to try and help you to see what we've got in there. So what I intend to do is to go through it all bit by bit. So if you can move on, please. Who's doing the slides? Olivia doing the slides?
Yeah, I'm doing it, yeah.
Right, okay. So so we can see what we're covering here: infection control, risk management and assessments, back to business, the personal protective equipment that is out there and what can be used, and pupil guidance for resuming the lessons. So we're not going to spend too long doing this because we know there's an awful lot of questions that are being asked. We're getting it on the help desk and on the support desks this morning, lots of it. So we know it's out there. So we're going to leave time for that to be discussed as well. So if you can move on, please.
Just to say hello, can everybody hear me? It's Carly. I've joined now. Sorry about that.
Oh, God. Oh, hello, Carly. How are you?
You tried to get away with not having me on this one, but I'm back.
Okay. So
Howard, certain things need to be said in your head, not out loud.
yes, I'm sorry about that, yeah. Put brain in gear before mouth. That's what they say.
Internal monologue.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Benefits. Who's going to benefit from this? Well, the ADIs and the PDIs obviously will. The motorcyclists fraternity do as well, and your clients. So the toolkit has got something for all three of those entities. We are creatures of habit. We have done things for a very long time the way we change. We didn't like these, well, some people didn't like the standards check stuff coming in, and we certainly didn't like the theory test coming in when ADIs had to retrospectively go and do it. But we've settled down to those changes, and now we've got another one that's slightly more serious, or a lot more serious, in the form of the coronavirus, and that's going to change things big time. And it's going to take a long time for us to get to a steady norm. Things will change bit by bit until everything is completely settled. And therefore, we need to gently explain to others how they need to fit in for learning to take place and competence and confidence to be gathered again and help keep our roads safe, basically. So this is what we're talking about today. Is a little bit in there for everybody, and the fleet guys as well. There's a bit in here for you too. So if you could move on, please, Olivia. And we've now got, you're going to see a lot of screens that look the same here, saying professionalism. And what I'm now doing is going through the suite that we've got in the toolkit bit by bit. So we're going to talk with the risk management video, because first of all, before we even go out the door, we've got to make sure that we are fit. So we've got to look at what the risks are. It's not just, is your car clean? It's not just the environment on the road and what standard your students are at. It's also your own well-being. Are you able, how vulnerable are you to susceptibility for contagion or catching it? Sorry, I'm all 6 and 7s. For catching it, make sure we know what your risk is and how to protect your own environment. This is what's in the risk management video. Are you able to cover all those bases to do what's reasonably practicable to keep a safe environment? And that's what that management video is about. It's all sorts of risks that are going on there. I would say that's one of the first things that you really need to look at before you move on into the other bits. There's bits that are very that are will take your attention straight away, like the risk assessment stuff, which a lot of people want. But I urge you to look at the risk management video first, because there's a lot of information in there, which is going to be very good background information for you, so give you a damn good idea of how everything else is going to work with it, where it all fits together. As they say, knowledge is basically based on understanding. So if you can get the understanding of where we're coming from with this and getting the whole holistic picture, then all the other tools that are in the toolkit will fit into place for you and will be not self-explanatory, but they will be easier to understand. We try to make it as simple as possible. You don't need an ology for any of this. It's quite easy to manage. We just need to explain so that you get the correct context of what we're looking at. So if we can move on, please, Olivia, if you will. So we're now looking at infection control and safe training protocols. This is a course for driver and driver trainers, and actually explains in very good detail what COVID-19 is. And I know we've heard COVID-19, coronavirus, C19, call it what you want. We've heard it for a long time. We're fed up to the back teeth of it. It's damaged a lot of people's families. It's done a lot of damage to the environment, done a lot of damage to the economy, and we'd like it to go away, but it's not going to go away. But so we need to understand it. So what is it? And that's what we're saying there. How it feeds, how it actually spreads, how we can interrupt that spread, and what other precautions we need to put in there. Now, I'm an ex-firefighter, and I always refer to this as the fire triangle. If you've got heat and you've got a fire source and you've got oxygen, you're always going to have a fire. But if you take one of those things away to interrupt the spread or to interrupt its ferocity, then that's the mitigating circumstance. What we mean by mitigating, it's what we can do to interrupt and limit. That's what mitigate means. So this infection control and safe training protocol goes through this in rather quite a lot of detail, but it needs to. So don't think it's something that's going to be boring and get your popcorn out in your flask. You do need to look at this so you can help explain to your students why it is that you haven't been able to be on the road and why the DVSA has taken such a long time to be able to get us back there. But really and truly, we're only just back by a fag paper's width, because the R number is only just at the right number for us to do 1+ in the distancing. So we can, if we're not careful, make this go backwards. So really, we're asking you to get the context and understanding of what the whole of that coronavirus is about, where it's come from, what it's doing. It's a living and breathing entity that we need to understand in order to get rid of it. So again, another very, very interesting piece of information in the toolkit that I strongly advise that you take the time to look at. If we can move on, please. The risk assessment framework and check sheet is 2 bits here in the toolkit. We've got the framework, which is the different scenarios that we look at from the household point of view to start with. So we're looking at the client's household. Are they in a COVID-19 risk environment, enhanced medical environment? Are they in a situation where they are shielding? So we're looking at their risk that they can bring to you and put into your learning environment, which a simple little antiseptic wipe is not really going to get rid of for you. So the higher risk they are, the less chance you want to be training them. But we've got to look at your household as well. If you've got a COVID-19 to COVID-19 situation where you're shielding, then definitely you shouldn't be out on the road training, and you certainly wouldn't be training that particular client. But the framework goes through the different scenarios of risk management for you to be able to assess who you're going to train, when you're going to keep them out of the car, when you're going to delay their lessons to, etc., and also what interventions you are going to take in terms of advice and actions. That's what that is. And there's about 12 or 13 different scenarios that are realistic that we've come across from people that have phoned us over the last 10 to 12 weeks. So we've used what we've actually come at firsthand. The check sheet is a sheet that you have as an instructor, trainer, motorcycle instructor, whatever, to be able to ensure that you've got things in place for each and every individual student. All right, it does duplicate where it says doing your daily checks. If you've got 5 students, you're not going to do 5 daily checks. You're going to do 1. But it is a complete check sheet which goes through starting with the deep clean at the beginning, or at least once a week, the very deep clean we mention in the protocols. And we go through what you'll be doing to make that person ready, what you've told them to prepare them, what they need to bring to the sessions, how you're going to deliver those sessions, and all this information is like a tick box to make sure they are fully aware, because you're still working under terms and conditions. And you may even have to amend those terms and conditions to say, look, we're in a situation neither of us can control. It wasn't foreseen this would happen. When my terms and conditions came to you, it didn't include the COVID-19. So we've got to be sensible about this. What are we going to do if you fall ill within 3 days of your driving test, for example? So you need to be able to put something else in there to see what is going to happen. Now, at this very moment, the DVSA have said that they will still honour driving tests for people who become ill with COVID-19 during the 3 days previous to their driving test. But that's not going to last forever. So you need to have something there which is a caveat to what will happen if they fall ill, and what the action will be for them in terms of isolation, who they have to contact, who you have to contact afterwards, because you may have to contact other students you've got. You could actually be in a mini lockdown. So all this has to be discussed with them. And that is explained again in the webinars and the videos and everything else within the toolkit. So this risk assessment framework and checklist works alongside with that. Okay, so if we could move on, please. Personal protective equipment is rather a big one. Now, it might sound daft. Recognition of cognition. It's not just about wearing clothes to protect us from a virus from touching us. It's all about the protection of making sure you are fully aware that the person you are training is of sound mind to want to do this. Now, I don't mean they've gone loopy during the time off. What I'm referring to here is that there's been a heck of a lot of interferences and inferences in their lives, which has created an awful lot of anxiety to some people where there's been deaths in the family, God forbid that, and and also where there's been a lot of domestic abuse and all sorts of nasty stuff that's been going on that you wouldn't even think man would want to consider, but it has happened. And some of these youngsters are impressionable, and I know they're not all youngsters that we train, but some of them are, and they are going to have a harder job readjusting to everything and getting back on the road, and they're going to be scarred, some of them. The risk of you becoming agony aunts, you need to understand exactly where they're coming from with a phone call, at least 24 hours before you have them booked in the car. So you can get all this information and then make a decision then as to whether they are in a cognitive condition, are ready for learning to take place, and can cope with the situation of the new regime that you're going to have for doing the training, the way that things will be laid out in the lessons, and all of the protocols they've got to put in place to help protect you. So washing their hands before they come out of their house, putting gloves on, you can watch them doing it along the garden path, staying outside the vehicle to have a discussion with them before they get in, telling them what they're going to do with keys and mobile phones that are not allowed to put on the dashboard or in the door pockets anymore. So you're going to make all those facilities available. All this sort of stuff they need to know. They need to be ready for this change. You also have to have time to get all the equipment together that you need, but you also need to decide, and we go back to these terms and conditions again, of whether they are going to supply the necessary equipment or whether you're going to supply it. Of course, if you supply it, you get them to wear, hopefully, what you want them to wear to protect you, but there's the cost. Have you put that into your driving lessons? Have you recosted the cost of your business? All this sort of stuff is really a protective thing to keep you going. PPE, health and cleanliness, the materials you need to clean the place down, the materials you need for doing the original deep clean, which you will repeat every week, and the risk assessments you've got with that to make sure that the stuff that you are putting into your vehicle to clean it is not then going to be a risk to somebody else who have allergies. And the PPE protection of clothing, face masks, etc. There are some things that are a no-no for you to use, like the big Perspex face shields are not advisable to do driving training with. We have a bit of an issue with the dividing compartment plastics that go between the driver's seat and the passenger seat, the dividers. There seems to be a little bit of a feedback on that, which is causing a bit of a problem with those. They don't vent the vehicle properly, and also there seems to be a vision problem looking left through reflections coming through the right-hand driver's window. So we've got, these sort of things need to be looked at for you to ensure that you can maintain a safe environment, because you have to do that. You have a duty of care to the student, and of course, when the vehicle goes to test, that student has you and the student have a duty of care to the examiner at the same time. So all of the confidence and competence has to be built up through the recognition of cognition, and that cognition has to be there in the first place for these people to take on the information that you need to take on. And you may have to be going gently, small steps with them to get them going until they finished all the norming and storming, and they've got back into the cycle of confidence and competence. Now, have we got any questions at the moment? Have I lost people?
No,
I've got something to add.
Okay.
On the subject of abuse, which is, absolutely awful. And as you say, Howard, we've seen reports on the news and things like that where some people have been in a lockdown environment, and they've been, subject to more domestic abuse and things like that. So you were saying about recognition of cognition, and making sure that your pupils are, as far as you can reasonably do, and work out that, find out how they are. Not saying that obviously this is going to go on in every household, but it will be going on in some. We, as some of you know, that we do a level 3 accredited safeguarding course, and that was a classroom. So obviously classrooms had to be suspended for the time being, but we have an online version which is just about to launch in the next week or so, and much reduced price. And it's an essential part of being a driver rider trainer anyway, to have this knowledge of knowing how to protect young children, young people and vulnerable people. So it is a nationally accredited level 3 course, and you will get a certificate and everything like that for it. There will be an assessment at the end, so we'll provide all that detail on the website, but it will be done as a home learning. So you will be doing it at home, and there will have regular group chats with us as your tutors on that course. So as I say, bear that in mind even more now, that type of knowledge that you need to equip yourself with, because there are many factors, many signs, symptoms of abuse, and we will go through them all. And on the group chats during the course, they're kind of interspersed amongst your learning that you do. There will be opportunity for us to discuss things like that, obviously with no specific details, no names and no nothing like that. So we have to consider GDPR and identification of individuals, but we can talk hypothetically at least. Okay, so that's coming soon. Just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, if you could move on to the next slide then, please, Olivia. Thanks for that. Okay, so we're now on to pupil guidance resuming lessons. Time to fess up here, guys. I've had to rewrite this. It's now in the toolkit at the moment in its current form, but I had to rewrite this morning after some feedback that it needs to be written in the first person. So I've now sent that off to the IT design guy, who is going to substitute that one. So the version that's in at the moment, yes, it's got all the information that we've got, but there will be a new version written in the first tense. So it comes from you, because it looks like at the moment that the DIA have sent it to your students. They don't know who the DIA are. So it's been just edited and amended. But the pupil guidance is a document. It's 2 sites, and it's information that informs the student of what the training regime is going to be. So they have it in writing. You can email it to them when it's done, and that gives them a heads up of a phone call that you will follow up with, and that's in that letter. So when you read it, you'll see what sort of things you need to discuss with them, and then that sets out the training regime of your communication and bits and pieces that'll go on. But then obviously you'll walk them through this when they get back to their first session anyway, but they have a heads up of what's coming towards them. It would be very, very fortuitous for you to do another license check. You haven't seen these people for 9 on 12 weeks. That's 3 months. It doesn't mean to say that because they've been told to stay at home, they have done. You don't know if they've got things on their licenses, and therefore the letter tells them that you will be asking for a license code. There is a link on the download for you to be able to get in there. In that letter, they can go into Swansea and get the license check code for you, and what they have to furnish you with for you to be able to open that code up. We suggest you don't open that code up until 24 hours before you see them. The code does last 21 days, but we suggest you don't check the license until any earlier than 24 hours before you're going to see them. So that way you get the most up-to-date information on the license. The letter also mentions that they'll have to do an eyesight test again, because again, we've been 3 months now since you saw them. And if they've been ill, has that left any problem with their eyesight that they're not aware of that you can pick up on the eyesight check? And also it includes a health checklist as well, sort of verbal stuff really. So does anybody want to add on the health checklist from Carly or Olivia?
No, not at the moment.
Not at the moment. Okay, fine. All right, that's still to come then. Okay, fine. All right.
So there's let me explain what that is. We're writing basically a medical questionnaire, health questionnaire for members to use with your pupils. And this is not just for COVID-19. Some of you may already use them. It's running through a series of questions about whether your client has any medical conditions or is using any medication which may have an impact on their driving. And in terms of mitigating risk, you may find from time to time, if you undertake an activity like an outdoor activity, or you even go to a spa, you're asked to complete these questionnaires to try and mitigate the risk of view of the client. So it's a sensible move for driver trainers who are taking out complete strangers in their car for the first time to understand whether that person either presents a risk in driving or there is a risk of driving for that person. So it's not just for COVID. Some of the things in the toolkit are for general training purposes, mitigating your risks as well.
Okay, so I think we've covered that quite nicely. Thank you, Carly. If we could move on, please. And we're now looking at back to business, which again is Carly's domain. But just let me go through what we've got here at the moment, and then Carly can chip in a second. It's basically a fitness check of the business. How to attract your new customers. That's one thing that's in there. Working out your costings is probably going to be quite important to you now, where you tend to bumble along and charge the same price and put them up when you think you haven't put them up for a while. We have now got a lot of extra costs in the business now with the PPE, all the cleaning equipment, the extra time you've got to spend now between sessions, getting the car wiped down, the phone calls you've got to make to people. But you've also got the fact that I'll give you a head start now, just to whet your appetite. Your vehicle is costing on average £11.80 an hour to run for a lesson, if you're doing hour lessons. So that tells you already, if you're charging 15 quid, you might as well lock up and go home. So you've got to start looking at the costings of what is costing your business with its additional costs, etc., and what profit you want to make. And we can't recommend how much you work, but we are saying that with the risk to exposure, that really you should be limiting yourself, if you can afford to something like about 5 hours a day. Now, it depends on how you do your sessions. The chief medical officer for the government doesn't recommend overexposure with a single person unless severe mitigation is put in place. Now, the information he gave that to was the transport industry, and he's talking about 7.5-ton trucks and larger vehicles where they have double manning, where they have a driver and a driver's mate. So they have got the added things of they must wear long sleeves, they must wear long trousers, no open-toed shoes, they must wear a face covering. Well, say must, they're advised to wear a face covering. And that means that, and also that the same person, when they work together, that team of 2 people goes out for the whole week or for all of the shifts that they work in a 7-day period. So those 2 guys are teamed up for that complete week. So they've only got those 2 same households going into that same building. The problem you've got with your students is the fact that you've got several students getting in there, and you might have the argument of, well, let's do intensive courses, but because we are at the close proximity range of less than 2 meters, the chief medical officer has said that isn't advisable. It's not advisable to have the same person in the car all the time because of the contact of the close proximity. And now we've gone down to 1 meter plus, letting us in the car, even doing the deep clean and doing all of the wipe downs between the driver. The reason we don't want the same person in the vehicle is to encourage the wipe downs of the vehicle as many times during the day as we can, getting the doors open so people get in and out, and airing the vehicle more with the windows open. That tends not to happen with the same person behind the wheel. So although you've got companies out there that are solely doing intensive courses, these guys, I'm afraid you're going to have to put more mitigation into your vehicle if you are doing intensive courses. I'll gladly talk to you about that if you want to get in touch with me later on. I'm not going to go into that now because it would take too long. So you need to work at the costings and manage the marketing. That is all in the Back to Business. It's a webinar, I think it is, done with Carly and Mark Ford, who is a business coach. He's a very experienced guy. And I can tell you the information in there is absolute gold dust. It really is. Anything to add, Carly?
No, I think you've done a great sales job for that. I mean, you covered off the price element that, people do need to think about increasing prices to factor in the increasing cost of PPE, the increasing cost of fuel, because although it might be at rock bottom prices now, obviously it's soon going to go up. There's talk of a car tax hike perhaps coming in. That hit the news yesterday. Car manufacturers will be charging more in the future because they need to recoup their losses, and we're entering a recessionary environment. You've got, less lessons, so your income will fall. In the Back to Business seminar, we say to people, sit down now, and if you haven't done this already, I suggest people do look to do this. Compare your year to date last year with your year to date this year. You may say, well, I know that I'm down on income, but it's knowing for sure how much to know how much you have to recover. Forecasting what you have to do in terms of lessons per week or per month to reach a level of income that you can happily live on. Most businesses, large and small, will tend to have a contingency fund of 3 months of cash in reserves in the bank account to see them through crisis. And it was clear that a lot of driving instructor businesses did not have necessarily this reserve. Going forward, I know you've been through a very tumultuous time and it's not going to be easy to do this, but going forward, we have to be honest about the fact that we could face rolling lockdowns. We could face regional lockdowns, which means some trainers might not be able to work. We could face the fact that track and trace means that you have to 14-day quarantine, so you cannot work. So having some reserves in the bank to be able to see you through those periods, because obviously we cannot guarantee that government funding will still be in place if we have these latest spikes of infection. Now, you'd hope the government will offer some support packages, but given the demands on our UK economy at the moment, we're going to be in a recessionary environment. We're already paying out a lot more than we expected to at this period. It's going to be difficult to know what support packages will be available. Now, we have asked government for advice on what could be available to support people, but at the end of the day, we also have to manage our own risk rather than saying, well, of course the government will help me or has to help me. You have to also help yourselves and look to see what contingencies you can put in place for the fact that this may not be the end. The start of going back to training does not necessarily mean the end of this crisis in terms of your ability to deliver training.
Okay, Carly, thank you for that. That's
in terms of helping with that, I say very briefly, don't just change what you charge in the webinar, and generally I say change how you charge. The hand-to-mouth existence of this profession has not helped it. So, looking at the fact that you should be locking in income, and you can lock in income if you use various incentives and marketing devices. selling blocks of lesson rather than one by one. I know some people are saying, I do that. I am teaching some grandmothers and fathers here to suck eggs. But for those who aren't doing this, if you allow risk into your own business, you have to take responsibility for that. So if you are not securing income, if you are not looking at devices to ensure that you have good line of sight of volumes of income, then that is your risk. That is what other businesses do to protect their income, is to ensure that, you know, the revenue is locked in some way. And there are ways to do that I think that people need to consider now.
Okay. Right then, so I think we've covered that one quite nicely now. So that's definitely one to go and look for, the Back to Business webinar that's on there. And I say that Mark Ford does a very good presentation of that. He really does. If we could move on, please. We're going to be doing, now that package I've mentioned now is really quite big already, but there's still more to come. We're going to be adding to it all the time. So the things that we intend to add to it is document stuff, really. Updating the terms and conditions. We do have updated terms and conditions now on the DIA shop, which you might want to go and investigate. I can't, off my top of my head, remember what's changed in them, but I know it does mention about the force majeure, etc.
Yeah,
so
they've always had force majeure in them. All
right.
agencies do. We've had our legal experts look at them, and it's my understanding, having done, you know, obviously with business background, I look at lots of contracts for lots of things. And force majeure does cover things like COVID. We are going to, however, in a belt and braces manner, produce a supplementary sheet to be used with the T&Cs that people can ask the pupil to sign additionally. But force majeure, what's in there already is sufficient to cover you. But, you know, I'm doing the belt and braces element of this as well. So you can buy the terms and conditions because they are the general terms and conditions of a driving school business. But we're just going to produce this free supplementary sheet for people as well. The other thing I'm going to look to produce is what's known as a risk or libel waiver. I do think, again, like a medical questionnaire, this is something that people should have been doing anyway to mitigate their risk. For example, as I used before, the same example, if you were to go and use an outdoor centre or any activity you undertook, or you went to a beauty salon or spa and you were having a treatment, they have professional liability and public liability and professional indemnity in place, but they will still ask you to fill out that medical questionnaire disclosing anything which might cause an issue or a risk. Plus, they often ask you in more hazardous activities, which arguably driver training still can seem to be, to sign a risk or libel waiver where the pupil undertakes to waive any right to bring a court case against somebody for anything that happens. And I think that is good business sense to have those in place. So we'll also have those in the COVID-19 toolkit soon as well. And libel waivers are recognised in most courtrooms as well. People say, oh, there's nothing to those things, they don't stand up. No, most courts will recognise that is a contract between two individuals, and if it is clearly set out and there is clear commitment from both individuals to that waiver, it should stand up in court. So I think that's a good thing we should be putting in there as well as good practice for the industry. Can everybody hear me? I think Howard's disappeared.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You know what it is? It's operator error. That's what it is. The microphone switch is staring at me and I was looking at it and it wasn't even on. I'm sorry about that. Let's try again. Right, so getting the vehicle back on the road. Let's try again. Vehicle back on the road. I was talking to myself. I'll get more answers that way. Getting the vehicle back on the road is the one we're doing for not just for ADIs, but for fleet as well. So this is a situation where you've been sat, vehicles being sat on the driveway or wherever for quite some time, not doing very much. And it's talking about, have you got all the documentation for it, tax, MOT, etc. They're the obvious ones, but also getting it ready for the use to go back on the road, the deep clean and all the packs of PPE you might want to set your car up with a little toolkit of PPE. And for the fleet companies who have had drivers furloughed, etc., lorries and that which are going to be mothballed that need to be cleaned up properly, and the drivers, some instances where there's been a reduction in staff and layoffs that there'll be other drivers that will be asked to increase their tasks and their duties, which could mean them driving vehicles they're not familiar with. So it's not just getting the vehicles back on the road, but with a driver behind it who knows what he's doing. So for the fleet guys, there's that to consider as well, and that's what we bring into the portfolio as well very shortly. Updating the training standards. We're doing a webinar, I believe it's next week, Olivia, isn't it, on CPD, isn't it?
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So that is actually will form part of the toolkit by being on next Friday, doing what CPD do you need to do now type thing, which is updated training standards for ADIs. There will be a bit in there for motorcycle instructors as well. So that'll be next week at the same time. And bringing drivers back to work, well, that pretty much goes alongside the getting the vehicle back on the road for the fleet people who have got, there might be situations where they say the furlough situation, they've got to come back, and it could be going back into vehicles that are they're not familiar with. So there's two things that run alongside each other there, but it's slightly different for a different perspective. So that's still to come. Can't put a time slot on exactly when all that will be there, but it is work in progress. So we will add bits as we get it ready for you. We know how important it is, especially the fleet guys will want to get back to work as soon as they can as well. So it's not all to do with the learner market. We have got the full license holders to deal with, and the motorcyclists too. So, and the LGV as well. There's LGV guys we've got to listen to this too. So we need to make sure they're all included. So there is going to be something in there for everybody. So that's what we've got so far. Are there any questions that we need that are starting or that need answering?
Yeah, we've got loads.
Okay, let's go then.
So should we start? I'm going to start from the very beginning because it's a very good place to start. Hi, as practical tests are set to resume from 22nd of July, can we still assume all tests after this date are on hold? Yes. What they will be getting through is the backlog of rescheduled tests in this period. The booking system for new tests, as I describe them, will not open for the foreseeable. I was supposed to have a briefing yesterday at several points with DVSA, but they got caught up in trying to get those headline communications out to ADIs rather than having the briefing, which I think is right. So I've got a whole list of questions on my desk to ask about restarting testing. But it's my understanding that, first of all, they will go through the backlog. And then they will look at how they're progressing with that to determine when they will reopen the booking system for new tests, if that was your question, Nick. Type in the thing if I haven't answered that correctly for you. And then Andy C is asking, is there going to be a change with key worker tests after DVSA starting again? Again, Andy, that is a question that I have for DVSA. They are going to continue with key worker tests until the 13th of July. And then I have asked whether they will continue with a fast track option for critical workers. I've actually asked if this will continue into the norm of testing for good, basically, because some emergency services have devolved examiner authority. They can examine and test their own people, like the fire service, but that doesn't necessarily cover things like doctors and nurses and anybody else that might at some point have a critical need. So I think it would be a good thing to have a more formal system for individual critical workers when there is a time of need to be able to go through in a much quicker way. Howard, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Do you want to take the one, because we've had this many times before, this question. We've been told to cover up with long sleeves, but my wife works with vulnerable adults, have been told by her governing body to wear short sleeves so they can wash their arms easily. Can we have some clearer guidance on this, please?
Yeah, it's because when we're in the car, we don't have the access to the water. That's what it is. And that's what the Chief Medical Officer said to the transport industry. So although you'll be dropping in and out of your vehicles, you don't have the same access to the plethora of water, volume of water, that the health people do, where they can go and wash their forearms and their hands, their wrists, their fingers in a certain way. All we've got is antibac wipe, when actually we need the virus down the sink. And those were his exact words.
Okay. I have a pupil with both parents who are doctors in a COVID hospital. I'm concerned she's therefore high risk. In my risk assessment, wonder whether I should terminate her lessons. What's your advice on that, driver trainers?
It depends on what your own household is. If you are shielding, or you have people who are in that, like what they call them, critical health risks, because there's 2 health risks now, isn't there? If they're in either of those and they're in your household, and you're coming in contact with anybody that's involved with the COVID-19 that's got risk of being exposed to it, despite the fact they might be well, then you then have to risk assess who is going to protect whose household. Are they going to impede your health standard of your household by coming into contact with you? And look at the risks that there is of them doing that, and then weigh up the pros and cons. That is what is on the risk assessment framework that I've done that's in the toolkit. If you have a look at that, all that sort of stuff is on there.
What is DVSA requirement for client and trainer PPE? You are all independent businesses, so you do have to make independent, responsible choices for your business about what PPE use. So there won't be a requirement, I don't think, from the regulator. There may be guidance, or they will share, as I know they are going to do, the standard operating procedure for the new normal of tests. So the standard operating procedure that you've seen published before is actually for critical worker tests. They will now share the standard operating procedures for the tests that will occur from now onwards. And there will be some guidance about PPE, that which will be worn by the examiner and what will be expected for the pupil. They may issue some guidance on PPE, but it is your responsibility to follow what guidance is out there from us and from other organisations, from HSC. The Working in Vehicles document on gov.uk gives some advice on PPE as well, and decide what is appropriate for your business as well. Howard, have you got anything to add to that, or Olivia?
I've got nothing to add.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair, isn't it? I mean, as you say, we're independent businesses, and everyone's got to, everyone's going to be very similar in what PPE and measures they need to introduce. And as I say, we've provided a lot of guidance on that, so everyone to have a little look at the toolkit.
No, I don't know how many examiners have been infected during lockdown while doing key worker tests. We can probably find out. I'm not sure that would be divulged to me. There is a check sheet or paper online. There's quite a lot of check sheets in the toolkit. I know some of you saying the website is crashing. We do actually have a very large server here at DIA, but it's taken a battering as obviously everybody's rushed to use the toolkit. So I know the tech team are waiting on that now. What's causing the crash is not people rushing to use a toolkit. It's the fact that many people have never logged into the members area or have logged in previously, changed their password, had problems. So what's crashing is actually the login bit, because people are trying to reset passwords or it's not working. So the tech team are working on a fix. So please do bear with us, and we'll try and get that back online as soon as we can.
There's a bit more to it than that, Carly, that the actual website is built with a safety device that if people keep putting in the wrong password, it will start to think it's being attacked. So it closes down voluntarily for a certain amount of time and then wakes back up again.
Yeah.
So we do urge you to, if you're not sure what your passwords are, to contact help@driving.org, and then we can farm that out and get those passwords back to you.
Yeah, so normally if you fail to do your login properly, not a problem, because it's a handful of people a day. But because we've had such a deluge, as Howard says, the website thinks it's having a cyber attack and is going to close itself down from a security. And most websites have that in place. So we have the devil's, kind of choice of whether we reduce security on our website, which is not a good thing to do, or we look what we can do to fix it in the meantime. But it's just it's part of our cybersecurity measures that we have to have in place. Quick question here: can you tell me what the issues are regarding face shields?
The Perspex face shields, as I am aware, and I've read in 3 different places, that the insurance companies don't like them in the combination of airbags going off.
Keith asks health forms, how we store them under GDPR. Olivia has actually drafted some GDPR guidelines on this. We're just reviewing them internally now. Please bear with us. The toolkit is an evolving piece of work. We've got in there the core foundations we think are important, like the course, etc. We're adding to it all the time. We're a small team who are dealing with multiple demands at the moment. The same team that's on this webinar now is also writing those materials, dealing with help desk calls. Some of us are involved in these DVSA meetings as well. So, we will try and get things on there as quickly as possible, but sometimes, it is a little bit slower than perhaps you'd like, but there is some advice coming on that for you as well. Can we ask for national insurance number and driving license number so we can check their legal right to drive a car?
It's not a good idea to ask for the NI number or to store it. That's quite a personal bit of information. So there are different ways, you can get the pupil to give the pupil the information, what they need. They can sign in, they can print something off, show it to you, or but it's handing over certain bits of information isn't a good idea. Only collect the data that you absolutely need, and then obviously making sure you're using ICO regulations to look after that data correctly. There are ways of doing it that lots of people will be doing. You normally, on the first lesson, you could always sit with somebody if they haven't done it in the car and do it. Obviously, in this current environment, that's not a good idea. We want to be away from each other as soon as we can. So it's maybe sending your pupils an email, a text, talking them through it on the phone, how they can go to gov.uk to view and share their license, how they can log in. So they need their NI number, the postcode that's on the license, and the driver number. They log in, they then view that license. They can generate a one-time only check code valid for 21 days, give that code to you with the last 8 digits of the driver number. And then obviously then you can log in, you can then see, but you are not viewing all of their name and address and everything like that. I know you'll physically see it on their photo card, but that will just show, disqualifications and penalties and things like that, and entitlements to drive certain vehicle categories. So if most driver trainers have been doing it for years, and since 2015, I think was the date it changed over from the paper ones. But people need to be, if there are any people listening, you think, I'm not sure, now is the time to do it, and you can use a help desk if you need further information on that.
Forgive me, folks, 1 second. I'm going to have to nip off this call. I've just noticed my daughter's school has rang me, which means she's probably fallen off a climbing frame or something as usual, or is trying to skive. So I'll just deal with that in case it is a real emergency. But one of the questions that I will come back to when I come back, folks, is what are the arrangements for parts 2, 3 and standards check post-COVID? So if you guys want to take some of the other questions whilst I'm off briefly, and then I'll return to that particular question when I'm back in 5 seconds. Is that okay?
Yeah. Howard, do you have access to the questions? Because I'm screen sharing.
Yeah, I'm looking at them. It's okay. I've got them. Let's have a look. Health forms. Can we ask national insurance? No, we can't do that. Just go on that one. Okay, fine. So the maximum, right, there's a question here from Fiona. What's the maximum length of lessons advised if advice is to teach for a maximum of 5 hours? We're saying an hour and a half, absolute maximum. Not 2 hour sessions, not really a good idea, because you want to encourage the doors to be open, people to get out, and the place to be wiped down. So certainly, I had an email from a guy yesterday, so he does 2 3 hour lessons, and the thing I said to him was, that's not really very wise to do. And he came back to me and said, sorry. So yeah, it's a situation where you think you're doing the right thing, but in fact, as far as the chief medical officer is concerned, little and often is better. One thing that was said that I got from the BBC on Monday or Tuesday, I think it was that if you are 2 meters from someone and you're not wearing any face covering, then and you are bare skinned on the arms and legs, etc., there's a chance that that contamination can take place to somebody else within a minute. If you are 1 meter plus without the mitigating stuff, it's 6 seconds. So we need to douse these cars down as safely as we can and keep the exposure as low as we reasonably can as well. So we're on the 1 meter plus syndrome, which means the R number is just bouncing underneath the tolerance that's accepted, which I believe is 0.85. Scotland is still between 0.7 and 0.9, which is why they haven't gone back. And Wales, I believe, might be the same. But we have got pockets in the country where it's higher. So we're only just able to come back to work. And that's why the government put the caveat, they can put the handbrake on if they need to, and they can do mini lockdowns again if they have to. So really our lessons, I would actually keep them at no longer than an hour. And at the moment, I'd keep things going like learning a language. When you learn a language, you do it little and often. And I think at this present time, and this is me personally, if I was on the road training learners, I would keep it to an hour at a time.
I'm back, folks.
We'll stop talking about you now, Carly, is what we'll do. Okay.
It was an attempted Skype. I'm the daughter of a nurse and sister of 2 nurses. So you had to be dying in my household when I was growing up to actually get off coming out of school. So the school nurse has been told in no uncertain terms to send her back to class because I'm that cruel. So I'm back on this now. I've got a question here. I've read that test centres are not letting ADIs in the waiting rooms or using their toilets. Do you know if that's correct? We haven't actually got the detail yet on how tests will operate. That will come out in the SOP, which will be shared with us shortly. It is something they have looked at, is, how do they manage that tricky balance of ensuring they provide a safe environment for the staff that have to operate the test centre, and also those people, in the environment. But how do they still offer the same level of service? So they've war gamed various scenarios, but it may just be, and please don't take this as the absolute, this is going to be what's happening. It may just be that waiting rooms aren't accessible in the first few weeks and months of test centres reopening. This is not obviously ideal for those of you who don't want to sit out in the rain and all those things that this causes. But the bigger risk is obviously having people in a small confined space and being able to ensure that space can be cleaned and kept safe as it should be. And if the decision is that they can't keep it safe and they don't have the resources to be able to do the sanitisation on a regular cycle that they'll have to do to allow people in there, then it may just well be that the waiting rooms will be closed off for the time being. However, that has not been confirmed. We will know all of that when the SOP has actually been produced. But we have to think about the wider risks at play here rather than the inconvenience factor of having to no waiting room. And that's the thing that they are battling with at this moment in time. So other questions? Oh, so shall I briefly go back to the standards checks part 2 and 3 question?
Yeah,
you could. Yeah, go on.
Now, so what has happened so far is DVSA have consulted closely with NASP, and also they have drawn together a guinea pig group, as it were, of audit trainers. Say what you will about that. People have their views on audits and whether it's a great thing or not, and some decide not to be part of it. That is the risk that you take if you decide to place yourself out of that group. That is the group the DVSA are going to consult with on these occasions. So they've drawn this group together, and various scenarios have been put through. I'm sorry I can't talk too much about them at this moment in time because they're still working through those plans, and there is a tendency for some individuals to get a piece of information that has been neither confirmed or properly worked through and rush to put that on Facebook because it's really for their own good that they have that kudos of being able to share that information, but they don't have any detail. It's not confirmed, and it kind of whips up a fever about it that is sometimes not necessary. So I can confirm that they are looking to resume standards checks part 3s as a priority, part 3 being the priority. They will be looking to prioritise before the end of the year getting those standards checks done of those individuals they are anxious to catch up with, if you catch my drift. So, maybe individuals that are seen to potentially present risk to the industry. It will take a bit of time to get that service up and running. However, what I can say is the plans that they do have in place are quite encouraging, and some aspects of what they've come up with to manage the process are things that I think would be pretty good to have in the new norm of standards checks and part 3s as well. So they're anxious to reduce the risks. there will still be 3 people in the car. There's not going to be a default to role play to mitigate the risks. The reason it's taking a while to share these plans is they obviously have to get people wider than DVSA, i.e. Public Health England advice on whether this increases the risk and how to mitigate that. But as soon as we can talk to you more about the detail of how these will occur, we will definitely share that information. But as I said, the viewpoint is to be fair to bringing people into the industry who've been waiting a while and are at the last level of their training. The Part 3s will be prioritised. And as I said, standards checks that absolutely need to be done. There is a message from DVSA. People should not be complacent that their standards check won't happen this year. And I think that's a message for those people who'd like to evade a standards check. Don't think that it's not going to happen and take your foot off the gas. There will be standards checks occurring this year, but it's probably unlikely that those will resume before August, September. But as I said, we'll come back to you with more guidance on that. So, will instructors be allowed to accompany a pupil on test? No, not in the short term. I know what I've just said about the fact that standards checks will continue in the same vein, but there is a regulatory need to carry out those standards checks. So that they do need to have that process happening. Whereas an instructor in the back of the car on a test, yes, it's an important learning point for the instructor as well. However, it's not deemed essential in the context of managing the risks of COVID-19 and operationally being able to resume testing. So it'll be a while yet before there will be any ability for you guys to observe your tests, until the risk actually goes down. Got a question from Donna here. 1 hour lessons very difficult to do in a rural area where you have to travel to an urban area to do certain aspects of training. Even 1.5 hours would not be productive. Driver trainers, is there any advice that you could give on those kind of scenarios?
Build in loads of breaks. Get them out of the car as often as you can. Do your discussions outside the car if weather permits. Get the doors open, get the place vented, and just mitigate what you can.
If it's a rainy day, an umbrella each. Don't share the same one.
Yeah. That's all you can do. You've got to work with it. It's all you can do.
Yeah.
I've got a question from Coralie here actually about vehicles and sanitizers and that. Well, it's not a question, it's a mention. It says, can you please mention not to leave the sanitizer in the car on a hot day? Reason she said that is because in America 3 or 4 weeks ago, there's a young girl that lost the sight in one eye when she opened up the sanitizer in America and it went into her eye, and she's now got no sight in her right eye at all. That's where that's come from. But sanitizer does explode. It is alcohol. It does explode, and therefore you don't want to leave it in the car, even out of sunlight. Take it out of the car if you can, when you can, if you're leaving the vehicle unattended.
Do we have assurance from DVSA that examiners will wear masks? Have we covered that one whilst I was off, or shall I cover that one now?
You cover it now.
Okay, so yes, examiners will be wearing a face mask, as far as I understand, and gloves, or they will obviously be carrying out proper hand sanitizing measures. The World Health Organization advice is actually that gloves can create a false sense of security, and non-medical or those who are used to working in a clinical environment tend to not change the gloves as frequently as they should do, or have more confidence in the gloves protecting them. So they can actually be quite risky in some senses if people don't change them often enough. So good hand hygiene is still the top level advice from World Health Organization and our NHS as well. So they will be taking every measure possible, and that is in place at the moment. But when that standard operating procedure comes out, that's when we'll have more meat on the bones about what tests will look like for you and for your pupils as well. So just bear with us whilst we try and get that information out of DVSA. Craig asked whether this webinar will be available afterwards. Yes, it's recorded, so it will be available in the Academy. Can somebody take a test without wearing a mask if they need glasses to drive? Howard?
Mitigating risks that the DVSA has actually put in from what I've read from the key worker SOP, standard operating procedure, that the examiner must be able to advise the student, if that takes place, on what to do in order to keep the test going where possible. If there's a situation where it could be due to nerves, etc., and there's excessive steaming up, the test will be stopped.
A question from Stephen here. Can audit trainers observe lessons for prep for Part 3 tests or standard tests?
At the moment, I don't know. I think that's a question you're going to have to ask the DVSA.
Yeah, I think we do need to get advice on that. So we will do so. It may be that it's decided that that's not a risk. That's not something that is absolutely essential in the process. So therefore, it's not worth taking the risk. It may have to wait for a while then. Phil says, not sure if this is mentioned, but is it safe to use the aircon? I think you've given some advice on that, Howard, in previous.
Yeah, we're advised not to use it, and also not to have the air on recycle. But if you've got the modes on your air, to use it as throughput air, which means the air comes directly from the outside, comes into the car and is not recycled. That's why you've got the windows open. So recycling air should be avoided, and aircon ought to be avoided. Now, there'll be some instances where aircon can't, because it comes on automatically with the ignition. You'd have to just ride with that. But ideally, if you can avoid using the aircon, it is advised by the Chief Medical Officer, if you can avoid using it, not to use it.
Wayne asked, do pupils need to wear masks on test? Wayne, very pertinent question. DVSA, up until a couple of weeks ago, were waiting to see what would happen in terms of public transport and whether public transport would have mandatory mask wearing, because that would set a lead from them. The problem with mandating things like face coverings for any government organisation or company is that it raises questions around about civil liberties and all those kind of things, and enforcing people to do so. So they always have to be very careful on the legalities of doing that. So since public transport went the route of mandating it, it's made it easier for DVSA to consider mandating that. So at this time, we have no confirmation of that, but it certainly is what they intended to look at doing. And that will come out again in the standard operating procedures as soon as we've got those. So watch this space on that. Donna's asking, she's got material seats, as we know, can get very sweaty. So can leather. You peel the back of your thighs off in the summer if you're wearing skirts or shorts in those. Can you use plastic seat covers? Yes, I believe you can, and you can get those in packs of 100 disposable ones. Howard, have you got any, or Olivia, any advice as a practicing trainer on the use of these plastic seat covers?
It's a shame Karen's not here because she uses them. But the thing she said to me on Wednesday or Tuesday, I spoke to her, was that they are very useful, the seat covers. The only thing is, in the hot weather, obviously they get hot, and you do need to dispose them after each candidate. And every time you drive, you need to change them over. So they do get through quite a lot of them, but they are very useful.
Yeah.
There are on the market steering wheel covers. We haven't trialed them, but I had some feedback this morning from a guy who's asked me, what are they about? I do know with the steering wheel covers that they do get hot very quickly, so you need to be careful with those. There's also a cover available for the gear lever, probably not so bad for automatic gear levers, which are actually down by the parking brake in the console, but for a manual car, personally, I wouldn't recommend having a gear lever cover on a manual gear lever.
Yes, and Deborah, you can look online. There's quite a lot of people offering on Amazon and everywhere at the moment pack hundreds disposable seat covers as well. Poor old Christopher, his signal's been intermittent, and he missed when exactly he can go back to work. Good news, Christopher, you can go back to work on the 4th of July, provided obviously that you have no underlying health issues or no members of your family have underlying health issues. I know it's a question that's been asked earlier on, if I'm a trainer who has underlying health issues. Again, that is a very individual decision, but the general advice is if you do have underlying health issues, you should shield. However, advice as recently as this week has changed for people who are shielding. So what I suggest you do is go to gov.uk and look at the updated advice on shielding. However, what they're advising there is just starting to, leave your house for the first time if you were shielding to the extent that you were fundamentally locked up and socializing only with a very small trusted bubble of people at first. So obviously being a driver trainer, you're going to have a lot more risk. So I think I would consider if your COVID is going to be a threat to you because of your health condition, when you can go back. We will see a stepping back of trainers. Some of you will be going out straight away. Some of you have already gone back. Some of you will consider when you go back for your own personal reasons about whether you want that risk or not in your life. And some of you will just have underlying health conditions or people in your family with them, which means that you cannot, take the risk of going back at this moment in time. So keep an eye on that advice on gov.uk. Emma's concerned about wearing a mask due to her asthma. Emma, there is advice about people who have respiratory conditions like asthma and using masks. I suggest you maybe look at the NHS advice on that or gov.uk. If you just Google what the advice is about wearing masks with asthma conditions, in some cases they advise you not to wear one because the risk to your respiratory condition is worse than COVID-19. So you need to see what the advice is for those people who cannot wear a mask, or if there are other types of mask which are better for your condition. So I'd maybe look at Googling that advice, because it's not really our area of expertise, and I don't want to give you the wrong advice there.
Carly, can I jump in here? Because we've got a couple of questions here which are duplicated, and it's really important we get this clear to people.
Yep.
And it's the question again that they don't understand the booking system for DVSA. So what is happening is all tests that, apart from not to make key worker tests, all general public tests that were booked before in the booking system, which would have taken place from March onwards if COVID hadn't taken place, are all on hold. So the problem is the DVSA sent out some wrong letters saying they were cancelled. They aren't cancelled, and those letters should be ignored. They are on hold. And what's effectively happened, if you can picture a railway line with a main line and a siding, all of the bookings that currently exist are in the siding. Okay, the main line will be the new booking system that is being opened up when the DVSA open it. They will the first tranche of people that will be invited to book their tests will be those that had their tests originally booked for March, which will be the last 2 weeks of March. They will then have another tranche where they'll start asking the people in April to book their tests into the new system. Brand new test bookings for people who haven't had a booking so far will not take place until the backlog of tests has pretty much been sorted out, and there's a lot of them. So it's going to be quite some time before new driving tests will take place. So what we need you to do is talk to your students that you know have got tests booked. We've got people who said they got them on 20th of July, 29th of July. Talk to those students. When the DVSA contact them to invite them to book into the new system, we need them to talk to you before they do it. Now, the reason for that is because it's a temporary system, we don't think that all the infrastructure is in there. So, for instance, ADI booking numbers, etc. It's possible you might still get your car double booked if you've got a multiple amount of students who all get told to book their test because they're in the same tranche, that your car could get double booked. And what we do fear is that if you've got two people who've booked your car at the same time, unbeknown to each other, one of them is going to lose their test slot. And we don't know if the system is being built for them to get another chance in that tranche to rebook, or whether they've got to go to the back of the queue. So we're asking you to contact your students and say, when the DVSA invites you to rebook your test, contact me, because I need to know when that's going to be to make sure you don't double book the car. And you can also then get them to book at a time that's going to be suitable for their competence level to ensure them a good chance of getting through the test on the booking they get. Now, hopefully I've cleared that up for you, but that's what's happening. The new booking system is not yet open.
I like your train tracks analogy. I'm going to steal that one.
Yeah, steal that one.
Good one, that one, yeah. I can understand why you're a trainer. So let's have. Is there any other important questions? I don't want to miss any. There's lots of questions, but we're just trying to prioritize the ones that are like kind of critical risk kind of questions, and really need to know questions. Okay, so theory tests, Natalie. Common story, this one. Pupil whose theory test expired lockdown after original test date. She's had an email saying her test is on hold. Theory tests, they will restart on the 4th of July. Again, we've only got the date at the moment. We haven't got the meat on the bones. And that's what we were hoping to get out of the briefing that we would get as first-tier stakeholders yesterday. So again, that's a question on my list, is what are we looking at in terms of the theory test process going forward? You guys haven't got anything extra that I'm not aware of on theory test restarting?
No, only the dates that came through from the DVSA.
Yeah.
The only other thing, I know we've covered it many times over and we've done it on the support emails, is the extensions of theory tests, which can't be done.
Yes.
To confirm that, because it's a legal requirement.
Yeah.
Pretty much in slate. That's what it is. It can't be changed. There's no way that there's time in the government to find the time currently for a statute change is what it would need, and for the amount of time we've got now, we're actually working. That's actually taking a lower priority now. So any theory test certificates that are likely to run out before a driving test will be able to be taken place will have to be resat.
The DVSA have put a request in for an extension, but they're not publicly announcing that, and there's been no feedback yet on whether they'll get that, because they don't want to build an expectation that it will happen. And I think the fact that they've resumed, they're resuming testing in July might not make that as much of a priority. However, I will seek an update on that as soon as possible. But again, there's lots of requests from lots of departments going through government and ministers at the moment for consideration, never mind sign off. So it's not necessarily the biggest priority to be able to do that. But it is, DVSA have asked and have been wanting to do that because they feel it's fair, but it's not always in their hands to be able to obviously grant these extensions. Stephen asked, do we need an FFP3 or will any mask be okay? Obviously, there's quite a lot of masks on the market. In our PPE webinar, we take you through the main types of masks. Some of the masks with the respiratory parts to them, it's being advised that non-medical professionals don't use those because there's limited stock of those masks, and it will deplete the stock available for the front line. So a medical grade mask of the 3-ply variety is seen as sufficient for most non-clinical environments. And there's also quite a lot of, one of the documents we've posted in the toolkit is the advice from government on working in vehicles. Don't ask me why. When that document was put together, every type of person working in vehicles was considered, including taxis, but driver trainers. But there is some good advice that applies to all people working in vehicles. So it's useful to have a look at that document. It's also available on gov.uk. I think it's called Vehicles Working Safely During Coronavirus. I've posted the link in the chat or the questions earlier on today. And that has some advice about PPE as well. So is there any other questions that we should be tackling, folks, as a priority?
I can't see the questions, guys, because I've got the screen share up, unfortunately.
Yes, we've got people saying they're having trouble getting into the toolkit. What we'll do is they're getting sent back to the login page. It's probably because of your password. So if you want to contact help@driving.org and with your membership number, if you would, because you need to be a member to get into the toolkit.
That could be another issue that we've identified. So yes, to contact help, and then we can deal with it from there.
The Society, Sally writes, Society for the Deaf has a pattern for a face mask with a plastic mouth window, because obviously for lip reading purposes, a mask is as much use as a chocolate fire guard. So considering children's hospitals ask for these, can we use them? Sally, I don't see a problem with you using them. Obviously they are a fabric pattern, as I understand it, not necessarily medical grade masks, but I think it's an individual choice whether you use them. If children's hospitals are asking for them, then it could be considered that they're good to use. And as you given scenario, it's about being client centered and being able to make sure that your client also safely understands the instructions that you are giving them. So they're probably quite useful in that respect. Olivia, Howard, have you got any thoughts on that one?
No, not at all. I think you've covered that quite nicely.
Okay, thank you. There's a question, obviously, that and this has come up before. Motorcycle tests and vocational tests were cancelled, not rescheduled. So what happens with those now? It's not that you're not going to be a priority in this system. They're looking at how they can start taking bookings for all cancelled motorcycle tests and vocational tests. And if you saw the dates we sent out yesterday, motorcycle tests and vocational will actually resume slightly earlier than car, because obviously with vocational and motorcycling, it actually is easier for them to maintain some social distancing. So we anticipate that there will be the ability to have those cancelled tests booked back in. I'm aware that Mark Yaffe is on the webinar, though he can't speak on it. Mark, if you can type into the chat for me if I've mangled the answer to that question. Mark is the person who is our motorcycling expert and attends the DVSA telecons on the subject of rider training for us. If Mark is still there and he could just send me any advice that differs from what I've just said there about how motorcycle tests will be prioritised. In the meantime, we'll just take another couple of questions. There's still people getting emails with stuff about the test being cancelled and on hold. I think we'll start seeing the first of those emails about with the booking link start going out soon as they get the system up and running, and others should follow after that. Quick question about the size, the self-employment income support scheme. Obviously, there's going to be a second tranche of funding in August. People are asking whether they'll be eligible for this. The criteria is if you go back to your emails that you've had from us over the last week or so, I did send one out, not obviously last Friday, that gave an update on the size. Your business has to have been affected still at the 14th of July for you to qualify. Now, I see it that all ADI businesses will still be affected as of the 14th of July because you will have not recovered to the level of income and pupils that you would have had at this point last year. Plus, arguably, you will not recover for a while because COVID-19 is necessitating you taking on less pupils. So your income is affected because of that for the foreseeable future. So don't worry too much about that. My business is still affected the 14th of July. It's my interpretation that you fully qualify under those terms. In that email that I sent out last week, there is advice that has been provided by accountants as to providing some evidence that may be required. But HMRC will be getting in touch with people soon to put more flesh on the bones of that second self-employment income support grant payment. Another thing to note about that, you can apply for it even if you had the first grant, so you can have it, you can have the second one. If you didn't apply for the grant the first time around for some reason, you can apply for the first time for this August one as well. So I'm just checking to see whether Mark's been able to. Myself and Mark will work to produce some separate guidance purely for rider trainers as well, people. So don't worry about that. People having a little bit of a chat about PPE supplies, and there's some good suggestions on there of companies. The bundles that we've got in there on the shop, they are just suggestions. They are not a gun to your head to buy from that particular brand. What that company is doing is bundling up a pack for convenience purposes. You can spend your time shopping around for cheaper deals and finding cheaper deals and going to separate providers for separate things. That is entirely up to you. We don't earn any commission from the company that we've got in the shop there. It's just literally they bundled up some quite useful packages and we thought it was quite useful to refer people on. But please feel free to make your own arrangements. What we would say about the instant PPE to you guys is they are a very reliable supplier, and also all of the equipment they provide meets with safety standards, BSC safety standards and European safety standards, and is medical grade as well. So just be careful about some of the stuff from Amazon and other places that it actually does meet international standards in terms of compliance and safety. There's some stuff coming off Amazon at the moment that seems very cheap, but it's my father's old analogy of buy cheap, pay twice in terms of the quality. Any comments from you guys on PPE?
No, it really is a situation of go and see what suits you. Just remember, if you're looking at gloves, that if you're going to supply gloves to students, be careful of allergies like latex allergies, etc. I would strongly advise that you say to your students they supply their own, but have a few spare in case they don't. And that way you haven't got the problem of allergies.
Antonio asks, could you please repeat the question regarding pupils wearing glasses and get steamed up? What's the advice about that in terms of face masks?
I think it's a good idea if you've got a face mask and you do wear glasses, just to have a little practice run at home before you get in the car, just to see how that mask is steaming up. There might be a different brand, a slightly different style that you might choose to have a little look at as well. As we say, we're in this for quite a long haul, I think. So it'll be worth using your time and looking into different ways of doing this. Anything else to add on that, Howard?
No, you're right. That's exactly right.
Then also, Sue's just saying, can she double check that a pupil who has a test the 23rd July is on the main line and not in the siding?
Any tests that were booked prior to the 15th of June, which was Monday last week, I think, they would have been in the system. All the tests that have been in the system prior to the 15th of June are on hold. So if that was in your student's grasp, but in her possession before the 15th of June, it's an on-hold test. So that means that that student will be invited at some date or other when it's her turn for the tranche to be re-invited to book the test again on the new system, whenever that is. But as we said, talk to these people and get them to tell you when they get the invite, because you need to know.
Sorry, go on.
Just a quick one on B+E, Howard. What's your understanding? Is that falling under the vocational training that will restart, or what's your understanding about any B+E?
Yeah, it comes under the vocational side of things.
So restarting on the 4th of July with all other training.
Yeah, I believe that's a Saturday, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. That's right. Yeah, in the DVSA announcement, B+E is actually mentioned for the 4th of July.
Stephen, if that doesn't answer your question because you just put what about car and trailer B+E, if you just want to type into the questions, if there's a further clarification you wanted on that. Ian, hi Ian, hope you're well. Sorry I didn't come back to you on your email. It's been a very busy time, but I do realise that I haven't still come back to you on our email. I'll try and do that if you still want our advice there. Anti-mist for spray for screens and visors should also work on glasses. So that's a possible solution for those of you who has the issue with wearing glasses, or your pupils do. Nick asked, what about a test booked on the 15th of June in terms of where it is in terms of the siding or the main line?
On hold.
On hold,
yeah.
On that sideline, yeah?
Yeah.
Ready to go into the main line, which is a new booking engine that has been created purely for this process as well. And we don't know at this time when the main booking engine will actually open again to trainers. When it does open, by the way, the booking system, the old one you're used to using, the priority will be to ADIs and trainer bookers. So it's not just going to be opened up to the whole world for them to pile in straight away.
I understand, Carly, that the DIA is actually being informed of when they're going to release that information.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I just clarify car and trailer? So you can train from the 4th, tests from the 13th of July.
Yeah.
Yeah, Stephen, hope that answers your question. I think we're through the main questions that we're getting in terms of the main topics that people are asking questions about. So I think if that's it in terms of the burning questions, you can always get us on support anyway, and various other ways of getting hold of us. Sorry we can't give you answers on everything today. We've only got the headlines at the moment in time. We haven't got necessarily the details. I said that was a briefing that was supposed to occur yesterday, probably going to happen next week now. But you know us, as soon as we've got information we can use, we will get that out to you as soon as possible. It was a bit of a hilarious day in a way that I've got a dark sense of humour yesterday, in that we were aware very early on of the announcement that was due to be made. That announcement was going to be made at lunchtime to you guys, but various things, ministerial approvals delayed it. So we were sat there with the information, unable to share it because it was embargoed. And we do have to respect these embargoes. They are in place for a reason. And if we don't respect them, that can lead to, you not being able to get the information that you need as a stakeholder sometimes as well. There is a reason that there are ADI associations that are outside of the fold. It is because they constantly leaked information. They broke embargoes that the rest of us respected. They gave half bits of information to their members, and they had no further information to be able to give them any comfort. So they were like a fox going into the chicken house and getting everybody riled up, but they didn't have anything to calm them down again. And so they also, there's various different reasons they're not in that fold now. And we have to respect that we want to share as much as we can with you as members. But sometimes if things are half formed and not confirmed, that's one of the reasons that we can't share them at that time. But what happened yesterday was, DVSA was asking us not to share as yet because they didn't have all their ducks in a row for the announcement. But then somebody noticed that Jacob Rees-Mogg had let the cat out of the bag in Parliament that day. So we decided to share that information because it is classed as then being in the public domain. So we can share it. But yes, sorry that it was a bit of an uneven day in terms of announcements, and that we appeared to be, and DVSA appeared to be trailing behind, news coming from other directions at the same time. It's been a bit like that throughout this whole crisis, and I think there's definitely lessons been learned by DVSA about communications. I do feel very sorry for the actual comms team. They are doing their darndest to get things out, but it's out of their hands a lot of the time, and they want to be able to inform people as quickly as possible. So they've also found it frustrating that more senior people outside of DVSA as well have not helped in that process. But hopefully next week, it will be a time of flesh on bones, guidance being produced. There is apparently going to be a 16-page document of guidance produced and an updated standard operating procedure that will be shared with driver and rider trainers. And that will include a guidance for vocational trainers, for rider trainers, and for driver trainers as well. So, we've got a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, at least this week. Next week, we should hopefully be emerging into the open light and be able to see a bit more around us in terms of guidance. What we're planning to do as well is obviously keep adding to the COVID-19 toolkit, but also produce some guidance for pupils as well as yourself and parents about what does the testing process look like? When I turn up at the test centre, what's my practical test going to look like? What does that look like for the rider? What does that look like for vocational? What lessons going to look like in the future for me as a pupil? So some guidance to send out there to pupils. And what will the theory test look like? What's going to be the arrangements at the theory test centre? So those will be quite useful for both yourselves and pupils. So we hope to produce those next week as well. So just bear with us, basically, as we start to provide a lot more information to you and focus on what our new normal will actually be looking like as we get closer to it. Anything for you guys to add?
Not for me.
So we'll take that as an end of the session because we are on lunchtime now. Sorry, just one quick one. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We will be getting advice from the devolved administrations as soon as we can. DVSA is seeking that advice and then to publish to you as well. So bear with us whilst we see what Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland are going to do about a restart date. I did hear that the Chief Medical Officer, I think it was from Scotland, said on a radio programme last weekend that he didn't think it was likely that training would resume in Scotland till August in their phase 4, but we need to seek clarification on that for Northern Ireland and Wales.
Just want to answer Stephen Phillipson's answer if I can. How did Red and Bill Plantsucher know that we were going back on the 6th before we did? They didn't. What they did is they twisted the government's arm with a letter saying, we intend to go back on the 6th. Tell us legally why we can't. So they didn't know.
And
it's just coincidence.
And they also didn't know because it was the 4th of July. And we knew it was going to be the 4th of July for a few days. And when they wrote that letter, the fact they said the 6th of July implies they didn't know. It was their desire to be back on the 6th of July. That was not a date that was ever targeted. That is a date, by the way, in the timeline, but it is not a date for tests resuming, and it is not a date for you going back to work. It's a date that's not been announced yet, but it's not really that pivotal a date. And even they wouldn't have been aware of that date. So that was a desire on their part and not a confirmed piece of information from any source at either DVSA, DIA or DFT. So thanks, folks. Thanks very much for you attending this webinar. And as I said, more information over coming days. Thanks, Olivia and Howard, for putting this presentation together and manning the helm of the presentation. And as usual, have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay well. Catch up on other webinars in the Academy, and you'll also see other webinars that we're adding as we go as well. Always feel free to suggest a webinar topic for us. We're really open to that. And if somebody also wants to co-present on a webinar because they're more of an expert than we are in a certain field, always happy to have different voices on this webinar so you don't get sick of mine. But we'll speak to you soon.